The key turned in the lock with its familiar click, and I pushed open the front door, already loosening my tie. It had been one of those brutal 12-hour days at the office, the kind where coffee became a food group and every email spawned 3 more. All I wanted was a quiet dinner, maybe a glass of whiskey, and the comfort of home. Sarah was standing in the kitchen, her back to me, stirring something on the stove. The posture was wrong, too rigid, too deliberate. After 8 years of marriage, you learn to read these things. "Hey," I said, dropping my briefcase by the door. "Something smells good." "We need to talk." She didn't turn around. My stomach tightened. Those 4 words have never preceded anything pleasant in the history of marriage. I moved into the kitchen, leaning against the counter where I could see her face. She was wearing her armor, the expression she put on when she'd already made a decision and was simply informing me of the outcome. "What's going on?" Sarah finally looked at me, her jaw set. "Melissa is moving into the guest house. She's going through a difficult time, and she needs somewhere to stay for a while." The name hit me like a physical blow. Melissa. My Melissa? "Your ex-girlfriend, yes." She said it so matter-of-factly, as if she were announcing we were out of milk. "She reached out to me a few weeks ago. Her landlord is selling her building, and she's between jobs. She needs help, Marcus." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You've been talking to my ex-girlfriend for weeks, planning for her to move onto our property, and you're just now telling me?" "I knew you'd react like this." Sarah turned back to the stove, dismissing my shock with a wave of her hand. "That's why I handled it myself. She's arriving tomorrow afternoon. The guest house is already prepared." "Sarah, we need to discuss this." "There's nothing to discuss." Her voice had that edge now, the one that said the conversation was over. "This is happening. I've already decided. You can either be supportive or not, but it doesn't change anything." I stood there, words piling up in my throat, none of them making it past the shock. My wife, my partner, had unilaterally decided that my ex-girlfriend would be living 50 feet from our back door, and I had no say in the matter. That night, I barely slept. Sarah was out cold beside me, peaceful as a saint, while I stared at the ceiling fan, making its slow rotations. Melissa and I had dated for 2 years before I met Sarah. The breakup hadn't been dramatic. We'd simply grown apart, wanted different things. Or so I'd thought at the time. But there had been something else. A few months before we broke up, I'd noticed small things. Melissa mentioning Sarah's name in conversation more often, asking questions about her. Sarah worked in my building back then, just a friendly acquaintance. I'd never thought much of it until after Melissa and I split, when Sarah and I had grown closer, begun dating. Had they known each other better than I realized? The question had flickered through my mind occasionally over the years, but I'd always dismissed it as paranoia. Now, lying in the dark, it roared back to life. Melissa arrived at 2:30 the following afternoon. I watched from the upstairs window as Sarah helped her carry boxes from a silver Honda, a newer model, I noted, for someone supposedly down on her luck. They were laughing about something, heads tilted together like old friends. Like co-conspirators. I didn't go down to help. Instead, I went to my study and started looking through old emails, photos, anything from that period 8 years ago. There had to be something I'd missed. It took me 45 minutes to find it. A photo from a company holiday party, 2 months before Melissa and I broke up. In the background, barely noticeable, Sarah and Melissa were talking by the punch bowl. The body language was familiar, intimate. People who knew each other well, not strangers making small talk. I sat back in my chair, the pieces clicking together. Sarah had orchestrated our meeting. She'd known Melissa would be at that coffee shop where we'd randomly bumped into each other. She'd suggested the restaurant where we'd had our first date, a place, I now realized, that Melissa had mentioned was her favorite just weeks before. My wife had stolen me from my ex-girlfriend, and now she'd invited her to live in our guest house. But why? Over the next week, I played the role of the compliant husband. I was polite to Melissa, civil to Sarah, and kept my suspicions locked away. But I watched, and I listened. Melissa came to the main house for dinner 3 times that week. Each time, Sarah insisted on cooking Melissa's favorite foods I'd once mentioned in passing years ago. Each time, Sarah would find reasons for me to leave them alone. "Marcus, could you check the sprinklers in the back?" "Marcus, the garage door is making that sound again." On the 4th night, I pretended to go to bed early, but instead crept downstairs and positioned myself where I could hear their conversation in the living room. "Can't believe he hasn't figured it out yet." That was Melissa's voice, low and amused. "He's always been a bit oblivious." Sarah laughed, a sound I'd once found charming, but now made my skin crawl. "But we need to be patient. The prenup is ironclad if I just leave him. But if he leaves me, especially for another woman, I still don't see why we need him to think he's choosing me. Why not just—" "Because," Sarah interrupted, "this way he looks like the villain. He abandoned his wife for his ex. I get the house, the assets, everything. And we don't have to hide anymore." The floor creaked under my foot. Their voices stopped immediately. "Marcus," Sarah called out, "are you up?" I forced my voice to sound groggy. "Just getting water. Go back to your conversation." I made a show of running the tap in the kitchen, then trudged loudly back upstairs. But my mind was racing. They weren't just old friends. They were together, romantically, intimately. And this entire situation was designed to make me look like I'd fallen for my ex again, giving Sarah grounds for a divorce that would leave me with nothing. It was audacious. It was manipulative. It was, I had to admit, almost impressive. But I'd heard them, and now I could play the game properly. The next morning, I started setting my own pieces on the board. First, I called Jeremy, my law school roommate, who'd become a divorce attorney. Over lunch, I explained the situation. All of it. He whistled low. "That's elaborate. And probably illegal, depending on how the prenup is worded. You documented that conversation." "Recorded it." I patted my phone. I started carrying this thing everywhere, just in case. "Smart. Here's what we're going to do." That afternoon, I became the attentive, slightly confused husband who seemed to be warming up to Melissa's presence. I asked her about her job search over dinner, complimented her new haircut, even suggested she might want to use our gym equipment, all while Sarah watched with barely concealed satisfaction. Meanwhile, I began my real work. I hired a private investigator. Not for anything illegal, just documentation. Photos of Sarah and Melissa together when they thought I was at work. Records of their communications. A timeline of their relationship that stretched back years, including several business trips Sarah had taken. That lined up perfectly with Melissa's vacation days. I also started making subtle changes around the house. Nothing obvious, just small alterations that would make certain facts clear later. I changed the password on our home security system, something Sarah never used anyway, and made sure it captured everything. I documented all of our financial accounts, every asset, every shared investment. And then I started the gaslighting. Small things at first. I'd mentioned conversations with Melissa that had never happened, watching Sarah's face as she tried to figure out if Melissa had gone off script. I'd leave my laptop open to websites about marriage counseling, making Sarah think I was fighting for our relationship. I'd come home with flowers, with compliments, with renewed attention, all while she grew increasingly frustrated that I wasn't taking the bait and falling for Melissa. 2 weeks in, Sarah snapped. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she demanded one night after I'd cooked her favorite meal. I looked at her with carefully crafted confusion. "Because you're my wife?" "Sarah, I know things have been tense with Melissa here, but I appreciate that you're trying to help someone in need. It shows the kind of person you are." The words tasted like ash, but her face went pale. This wasn't the script. I was supposed to be angry, resentful, drawn to Melissa by proximity and shared history. Instead, I was being the perfect husband. "Marcus." She seemed to be searching for words. Are you attracted to Melissa?" "What?" "No," I laughed, making it sound natural. "Honey, that was 8 years ago. We're different people now. She's basically a stranger to me." I paused, let a beat pass. "Why would you even ask that?" She couldn't answer, not without revealing the plan. Week 3 was when I made my first aggressive move. I invited my parents for dinner, on a night when I knew Sarah had planned to be spontaneously called away, leaving Melissa and me alone. When Sarah tried to reschedule, I acted confused. "But your mother specifically said Friday works best for her, and I already told my parents. It would be rude to cancel now." I smiled. "Melissa can join us. Mom and Dad would love to meet your friend." The dinner was magnificently awkward. My mother, who I'd briefed beforehand, was icily polite to both Sarah and Melissa. My father, a retired judge, asked pointed questions about their friendship, about how they'd met, about the timing of various events. By the end of the evening, Sarah was visibly rattled, and Melissa had excused herself early with a claimed headache. "That was your ex-girlfriend?" my mother asked as they were leaving, her voice loud enough to carry. "The one you dated before Sarah? How unusual that she's living here now." The seed was planted. My parents knew something was wrong, and more importantly, Sarah knew that I was bringing other people into the situation, people who would remember these details later. The next day, I suggested to Sarah that maybe Melissa had imposed long enough. "She seems to be doing better," I said over breakfast. "Maybe it's time for her to find her own place. I'm sure she wants her independence back." Sarah's knuckles went white around her coffee mug. "She's still looking for work. She needs more time." Of course. I nodded agreeably. "I just want to make sure we're not enabling dependence, you know. But you know best. You've been such a good friend to her." That afternoon, I overheard them arguing in the guest house, the first crack in their facade. Week 4 was when everything accelerated. Melissa apparently decided that subtlety wasn't working. She started appearing in places she shouldn't be. My study while I was working from home, the master bathroom while I was getting ready for bed, always with innocent excuses that would look damning to an outside observer. She started touching my arm during conversation, laughing at things that weren't funny, wearing clothes that might, in another context, be considered suggestive. Every interaction felt like a performance, designed to be witnessed by Sarah, to create the appearance of mutual attraction. I played along, but in my own way. Every time Melissa got too close, I'd bring up Sarah. "Sarah would love this restaurant. Sarah was just saying something similar. I should check with Sarah first," making it abundantly clear that my wife was the center of my world, even as that same wife was trying to push me toward another woman. It was driving them both insane, and I savored every moment. But I was also preparing my endgame. Jeremy had helped me file certain paperwork, not divorce papers, not yet, but documents that would protect my assets if things went south. I'd moved money into accounts Sarah didn't know about, not to hide it from a divorce settlement, but to ensure I could survive if she tried to freeze me out. I'd documented everything, the recordings, the investigators' photos, the timeline, the paper trail of their relationship. And then I set the trap. I told Sarah I needed to go to Seattle for a business conference, 4 days, leaving on a Thursday. I made a big show of packing, of complaining about the timing, of kissing her goodbye at the door. Then I checked into a hotel, 15 minutes away, and waited. The cameras in the house told me everything I needed to know. Within hours of my supposed departure, Melissa had moved from the guest house into the master bedroom. They didn't even wait until nightfall. The cameras captured them laughing, celebrating, Melissa wearing one of Sarah's robes like she already owned the place. That night, they ordered expensive wine, cooked steaks I'd been saving for a special occasion, and made plans. The cameras caught it all. Discussions about how they'd redecorate once the divorce was final, about the European vacation they'd take with my money, about how they'd been in love since before I'd entered the picture. "I still can't believe we pulled it off," Melissa said, her voice crystal clear on the recording. 8 years of planning. "He never suspected a thing," Sarah agreed. "God, I thought I'd go crazy pretending to love him all this time. But it was worth it. Everything we wanted is finally happening." I watched from my hotel room, my phone in my hand, every word being documented, backed up to 3 different cloud services. On Sunday afternoon, I came home early. I didn't announce myself. I simply walked through the front door at 3 in the afternoon, while they were both in the living room, Melissa's feet in Sarah's lap, both of them drinking mimosas and watching some romantic movie. See, the look on their faces was worth everything. "Marcus!" Sarah jumped up, nearly knocking Melissa off the couch. "You're home early." Conference ended a day early. I set down my bags slowly, deliberately, looking between them. Interesting. Having a girls' day? "We were just," Melissa started. "Save it." I held up my hand. "I know everything." The color drained from Sarah's face. Know what? I pulled out my phone, pressed play on one of the recordings. Their voices filled the room. "Can't believe he hasn't figured it out yet. The prenup is ironclad if I just leave him." I let it play for 30 seconds, then stopped it. The silence that followed was deafening. "I've known for weeks," I said calmly. "I've recorded everything. The conversations, the timeline of your relationship, the photos. My lawyer has copies. My parents have copies. Hell, I've got copies stored in 3 different states." Sarah tried to speak, but nothing came out. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "First, Melissa, you're going to leave. Now, pack your things from the guest house, which, by the way, I own separately from the marital estate, something I made sure to check, and get out. If you're not gone in an hour, I'm calling the police and having you removed for trespassing." Melissa looked at Sarah, who still seemed frozen in shock. "Second," I turned to my wife, "we're getting divorced, but not on your terms. Thanks to your little plan, you've committed fraud. My lawyer is very interested in presenting evidence that you entered into our marriage under false pretenses, that you've been conducting an affair throughout our relationship, and that you conspired to manipulate me into being the villain in a divorce proceeding." You can't." Sarah finally found her voice. "I can and I will. See, that prenup you were so confident about? It has a clause about infidelity and fraud. My lawyer assures me that with the evidence I've gathered, not only will you get nothing from me, but I might actually have grounds for damages." I walked to the stairs, then turned back. "Oh, and Sarah? You should know that I stopped being oblivious about 8 years ago. I knew something was off when you and I got together. I just chose to believe in you, to trust that what we were building was real." I felt the emotion creeping into my voice and pushed it down. That was my mistake. I won't make it again. Melissa was gone in 40 minutes. Sarah tried to argue, to explain, to somehow salvage the situation, but I'd moved into the guest room and locked the door. The next morning, she was served with divorce papers. The proceedings took 6 months. Sarah tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her lawyer eventually advised her to take the settlement Jeremy had crafted. She'd get a small payout, enough to start over, but nowhere near what she'd hoped for. The house was mine. The investments were split equitably, but the larger share stayed with me. And most importantly, the narrative was mine. Word got around, the way it always does. People who knew us heard about the elaborate plan, The recordings, the betrayal. Sarah's reputation in our social circle never recovered. Neither did Melissa's. As for me, I sold the house 6 months after the divorce was final. Too many ghosts, too many memories of betrayal. I bought a condo downtown, something modern and clean, with no room for guest houses or hidden plots. I learnt important lessons from those 4 weeks. About trust, yes, but also about the importance of staying aware, of not becoming complacent, about the difference between love and manipulation, about the necessity of protecting yourself, even from the people you think you know best. On quiet nights, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd never overheard that conversation, if I'd remained oblivious as Sarah believed I would. Would they have succeeded? Would I have played the role they'd written for me, the faithless husband who abandoned his wife for his ex? Probably. I'd been that trusting, that naive. But I wasn't anymore. The last I heard, Sarah and Melissa had moved to Portland together. Part of me hopes they found happiness there, away from the wreckage of their scheme. The larger part of me doesn't care. I'd reclaimed my life, my agency, my sense of self. I'd turned their manipulation back on them and emerged not just intact, but stronger. And I'd done it without becoming the villain they'd tried to make me. That, in the end, was the real victory. The guest house might have been their stage, but I'd rewritten the entire play.